still rolling in. So if we could all take a seat. So everybody come on in who's coming for our final plenary and have a seat. Okay, I'm going to begin with my final little bit of messaging here. So, a few little things first. As we announced earlier, there were 3 insulin pens left on the bus on Friday, and nobody's claimed them, so maybe no one needs them. But if you do, we've got them at the front desk. Also, a pair of sunglasses, which you will need, and a disc. A disc was left. An actual CD was left in the Laurel room. So you will want that too, I believe. So just go ahead and reclaim it on the front desk. We've been mentioning that we're going to have a site to upload photos. We've got it up, so you can just see it right on the website. So please, follow the directions given there, and please upload some of your photos because I know you've got some good ones. I've been seeing them all week long, so it'll be great to share those. We've been mentioning this raffle. Well, we finally decided, okay, we're going to do the drawing ourselves. The interns did the drawings. And so we have 2 winners from amongst the graduate students that are the grand prize winners. That means they get 2 books from the collection. Brandon Bombardier. Where is he here? He isn't here. Okay, but he's one of our interns. Brandon. And Beatrice Gray. Yay! So you two, by the luck of the draw, get to go pick volumes first. And then we have enough for each graduate student who entered to choose 1 book from the collection, okay? So these are what the booksellers left behind, or the publishers. But we have an order. So the order is out there. We drew and put down who was first and second. So if you're in the first group, you get to go choose yours first. So that'll just all happen afterwards, okay? And you just go collect your book to take home with you. We have 16 T-shirts left in our new order, so that's great too. And the excursion, so that's an important thing for us to bring up to you. So all of them will be leaving. I'll let these people come in here. All the excursions will be leaving at 7:30 a.m. So that's the Austin, the Tubing, and the Bandera, except for the Texas German Hill Country will be meeting at 8 a.m. Okay, everybody got that? It's all meeting in the lobby. If you're going on any of the Saturday excursions, the 4 Saturday excursions, Austin, meet at 7:30. Tubing, 7:30. Bandera, 7:30. Texas Hill Country, Texas German Hill Country, 8 a.m. And the Mariachi Mass people. If whoever's going on that on Sunday, it's at noon, and so we're going to meet at 10 a.m. and take you to breakfast at a good classic, Mexican spot down by the missions, and then we'll go to San Jose for that. Meet upstairs. Also at just the lobby on level 1, the lobby area. That's at 10, and then we'll go immediately to breakfast together. I need to say thanks one more time to some of our sponsors, to the NSF, the National Science Foundation, Humanities Texas, to ORAU, the Oak Ridge Associated Universities, to Casa de España, to University of Texas at Austin, to the University of Texas at San Antonio especially, to Texas State, and to A&M San Antonio, A&M College Station. So we had lots of good support from universities in the area. And then we just found out today that we got a $3,500 grant from Staples Foundation. So yay! And then just every little bit helps. So we really appreciated that, special endorsement from them. And the final thing that I want to say, actually, amongst the announcements is that after our plenary by Marianne Mithun, we are going to have a really special closing, and it is in the hands of our special guest, Robert Soto, and he is an important member of the Lipan Apache tribe in our area. So he's going to perform. He's going to give a closing song as a means of a beautiful closing for our gathering here. So my final words here are, it's been the greatest pleasure hosting all of you, and I'm going to miss you. I don't want this to stop. I can't believe we're already. Oh my gosh. It's been so much fun and such a lovely time. So I'm going to turn the floor over now to our wonderful final plenary and to Jeffrey Kahn, who will introduce Marianne Mithun.
Well, it's a very great honor for me to have been asked to introduce Marianne Mithun, whose lecture is the finale of this wonderful conference. It seems to be tradition that the people who introduced the plenary speakers have had acquaintance of personal acquaintance with the speakers for many years. And in the case of Marianne, I only had the pleasure of meeting her at this conference. But I have to say I've been a great admirer of her work for many years from a distance. Marianne is Professor of Linguistics at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and she's the leading scholar of native North American languages. Throughout her career, she's devoted herself to the documentation and analysis of these languages. She completed her PhD thesis at Yale in 1974 on the Tuscarora language. She then went on to do extensive field work on dozens of other languages of North America, often working with the last known speaker. Her publications are breathtaking, both in their quantity and in their quality. The majority are based on her unique knowledge of the precious data on North American languages. They treat a wide array of features, including phonology, morphology, syntax, discourse, areal features, diachrony, social linguistics. Many publications discuss general topics on language typology that emerge from her fieldwork, such as voice, discourse topics, anaphora, switch reference, to name but a few. One of the highlights of her scholarship is her book, The Languages of Native North America, published by CUP in 1999, and it is this book which I have read myself with great interest. It's full of an incredible amount of data and is a remarkable record of linguistic diversity, which is rapidly disappearing. Marianne's work on these languages has preserved knowledge of them for future scholars and for the Native American communities, and she has made, I believe, an immense contribution to humanity. In 2002, this book deservedly won the Leonard Bloomfield Book Award. She has also made a major contribution to the service of the academic community. She was founding president of the Society for Linguistic Anthropology in 1983 and has been president of the Association for Linguistic Typology and the Societas Linguistica Europea. She has also nurtured many students and has inspired generations of scholars in the field. I have not seen her in action in her classes, but since it's the custom in the USA for students' assessments of university professors to be made public, I was doing a little bit of I made a little bit of research this afternoon on the website, on the site from Mary's University entitled Rate My Professors. And I'll just quote you one comment I found there. Insanely smart, knows everything about every language on earth. So, Mario.
Oh my goodness. Jeffrey, thank you. I actually didn't before I came to this meeting, but now, Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Bridget, for giving us this. This is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's just, And thank you for coming, because I know how brain dead you must feel at this point. So I'll do my best to keep you alive one more hour. Okay, well, I think we all know it's now clear that structure can be transferred across family lines with or without substance. Okay, but the question is, how does this happen? Okay, and actually this year, 50 years ago, Bill Jacobson published a very famous article called Switch Reference in Hokan Kohui Tekken. And people had never sort of thought about this very much. I mean, anyway. And here's how he defined it. He said, a switch in subject or agent is obligatorily indicated in certain situations by a morpheme, usually suffixed, which may or may not carry other meanings in addition. Okay. And he, in that article, he had worked on Washoe, which is a language isolate sort of near Reno, Nevada. He described it for Kashaya Pomo, based on Bob Oswalt's work, Washoe, based on his own, Tonkawa, Zuni, Hopi, and Southern Paiute, okay, and Tubachulaba, and here's where they are. Okay, none of these are related. Okay, and he gave a couple examples from Kashaya, Pomoan language, from Bob Oswalt. So here's essentially the prototypical phenomenon. You have a sentence like this. Okay, this is Kashaya. Okay, so you see that flew up, SS. Flew away, and that's translated by Bob, a bird having flown up, the same bird flew away, and that's opposed to this, which has the same verb here, but it's got a li on there, and then you've got the flew away, and that's a hawk having flown up, a different bird flew away. So that's sort of prototypical switch reference. Well, and Bill said in that article, the principal emphasis is on the cognitive and typological analysis of the device, but some attention is also given to the question of whether this device is a specific enough point of resemblance between these languages to constitute a piece of evidence for a genetic relation between them. This was sort of on the tail end of a big groundswell in North America. I mean, North America has a lot of languages, so we know of at least, well, about 300 distinct languages in north of Mexico. And more than 55, somewhere between 55 and 60 distinct language families. Okay, and a lot of these are on the order of Indo-European time depth. So of course, what everybody wants to do is make order out of chaos, and so the whole idea is, let's find reasons to pull them together, and there have been various attempts to do that. And so people were thinking, maybe finding switch reference around North America shows that they are all really just, the same thing. Okay. Well, this set off, Bill's article set off a firestorm of people suddenly finding switch reference, and a real sort of volcanic eruption of work on this, fortunately. People can say, oh, I have it too, and oh, I have it too. So there's been a lot of literature from then on ever since. There's some important collections, starting with Pam Monroe, and then a very famous one by Pam Monroe and John Heyman, Switch Reference and Universal Grammar, and another more recent one, which is quite an impressive work, pulling together a lot of stuff by Rick Van Hain and Jeremy Hammond. Okay, and not just these collections, a fair number of individual works. So here are some additional descriptions of switch reference systems. And here are some more, and here are some more, and here are some, and here are some. Okay, you're getting the idea. There's some too, okay? And there's a lot more. So that's just kind of an idea. So you can see this has been a hot topic. So it's not just in those languages he mentioned. Now, something that's quite interesting about switch reference system is striking areality, and people have commented on this. So they're not only kind of widespread around the world, they also appear in sort of geographical clusters among languages that aren't necessarily related. In a very nice article, Peter Austin talks about Australia. We'll come back to this article. He says a number of Australian Aboriginal languages have verb suffixes indicating whether or not the subjects of syntactically related main and subordinate clauses are referentially the same or different. Okay, and he says the languages which have switch reference are all geographically adjacent, Central and Southwestern Australia. Okay, but not obviously related genetically. Okay. Roberts talks about New Guinea, and he says of 169 language sample in New Guinea, 122 of the languages, 70%, have switch reference systems, okay? And that was a little while ago, and people have been finding more switch reference since then in New Guinea, okay? He says in a largely geographically contiguous highland area, central, northeastern, southeastern mainland. Van Kane talks about Western South America. He says you find this in the Andean range, Quechuan, Uru, Chipaya, earlier Aymaran, adjacent Upper Amazon, okay, Eastern Macroge, many Tupian languages. Okay, you're getting the idea. And Van Kane even cites work by Trace, East Cushitic languages, okay, that have developed switch reference systems under the influence of North Omotic languages where it is widespread. So we're kind of seeing a lot of these geographic clusters. North America, Mackenzie did a survey published in 2015, and in his survey he cites 68 North American languages from 12 families and 4 isolates, geographically skewed, bulk in continuous area in the US, he says west, actually southwest, and adjacent northeastern Mexico, also in the southeast, northwestern Mexico. This is kind of suggesting contact effects, you know, if you look at it after a while, yeah. But you saw what this stuff looked like, and the question is, how would you transfer this? So if you speak one language that has those little bitty suffixes on complex sentences, are you going to just kind of drag them over to your next language? And more to the point, the substance actually doesn't match in these geographical areas. So nobody grabbed a suffix like this and pulled it over. So somehow you had these suffix things and very abstract grammatical functions, and then they're replicating them over here with different stuff. So the question is, how could this happen? I mean, speakers don't drag these little bitty things, do they? Okay, usually without substance. How could bilinguals borrow bound morpheme functions without the morphemes? Okay, well, Peter Austin in that article shows very nicely that in that situation, he's finding exaptation. So he says the phonological shape of the actual morphemes differs from language to language, but 3 associations appear. So in some of the languages, you have the same shape between locative case and same subject markers. In another set, you have an association between the shape of locative case and different subject markers, which is kind of interesting. And then another area, you have association between allative case marking and different subject markers. Okay. So, and he points out that these patterns of association are areal. So one group of languages will show this association, and the next will show that, and the next will show that. What spread was extension of function of existing case markers to new functions. So people, who spoke this language thought, oh, okay, I can use my locative marker like this, and then they go to their other language and they use their locative marker innovatively like that too. So he's pointing to exaptation. And Mackenzie talks about exaptation in North America, and he says the co-opting of morphemes from one module of grammar to another without changing phonetic form in order to serve a different function is often triggered by language contact, resulting in a pattern of replication. Okay, so is that what happened? Does this do it? Okay. Well, one thing we see from all this work on switch reference, and I'm going to actually put it in scare quotes, is that it's not just one thing. There are lots of kind of differences in things that have been called switch reference. And if these things are different, subtly different, sometimes quite different, are they all being transferred by the same mechanism? Or do they have kind of different stories? And that's kind of where we're going to go. I'm going to say the story's still more interesting. Switch reference systems aren't all the same. And different kinds of systems can develop from different sources and travel in different ways. My focus here is first on the value of delicacy in documentation. And we'll see what that looks like. And the second is appreciation of the extended diachrony of contact. And I mean, we often think about contact as, you know, you've got this over here and you just grab it and that's it. But of course, what we don't realize sometimes is that both of these systems are always moving, and maybe you didn't just grab it at this moment. Maybe the grabbing happened at another point in time. So we'll see how that looks. Okay, so I'm going to look at the Pomoan family. This is the family that was part of Bill Jacobson's original work citing Kashaya. Okay, these are the California languages. There's a lot of genealogical diversity in California. Somewhere around 20 distinct language families. That includes isolates. So that's a lot of diversity in one state. We don't even know how many languages there were. In some cases, it's because languages disappeared too quickly for us to really know much. In other cases, it's because the documentation is so challenging that you don't know whether you've got the same language by different people documenting it, or dialects, or whatever. But there's a lot of diversity. At the same time, we've got switch reference systems sort of popping up in corners around California, which is quite interesting. I mean, sort of pockets and pockets and pockets. We're looking at Pomoan. So it's just north. This is San Francisco Bay. So San Francisco is right here. And Pomoan is like 100 miles north of San Francisco. I'm going to look at Central Pomo especially, because that's what I worked with. It's spoken from the coast about 40 miles inland. It's a neighbor to Kashaya, which we saw earlier. It's quite closely related, different, not mutually intelligible, but similar systems. That's what it looks like. It's beautiful. Okay. So what happens if you elicit? Oh, yeah, it works great if you elicit. Actually, I only elicited quite after a long, long time because I thought, gee, I wonder what happens if you elicit this stuff. What does it look like? And sure enough, looks like subject co-reference. So I asked for this in English. We sang and danced, and we get this N suffix, which is a same marker. And then I asked for we sang while they danced, and yes, it's great. We get the different marker. So you can see it's just the way you want it. Yeah. Okay. However, if you let speakers loose and let them actually say what they want to say and talk to each other, things don't look exactly the same. Okay. Yeah, it gets much more interesting. Often enough, you know, it kind of mirrors subject reference. Yeah. Okay. This is a kind of tree. It's called basha. Basha is it's California buckeye. It's like giant chestnuts, and it's a major food source. And you can kind of see, if you know anything about chestnuts, you can kind of see the flowers are sort of like that. Yeah, they're kind of like chestnut flowers. That's what they look like. Yeah. That's what they look like when you can see they look like chestnuts, but they're big. Okay, so here's a sentence. This speaker was talking about how she fixes her buckeyes, and she says, when gathering buckeyes, you have to cook them right away. Okay, and yeah, you've got a same marker, and it looks like it's good subject co-reference. You know, you're gathering the buckeyes, you've got to cook them. Okay, here you can hear what it sounds like. Okay. Yeah. And that was the same marker. Here's a different marker. She says next, those buckeyes, if you let them lay too long, they go bad. Okay? And it's what you would expect. So the buckeyes, okay, but then you let them go too long, they go bad. So it's different, and it's working out beautifully.
Mul bashael doi bati kaya la emo baset cho doan.
Yeah, okay, so we've got nice switch reference, right? It turns out it's not just same and different. It's a little bit more elaborate system. So there's the same and different dimension, but there's one set of markers for irrealis, so stuff that you sort of imagine. So like she's saying, well, if you're going to do this, you do that, and if this happens, you do that. It's like conditionals, counterfactuals, polite commands, some futures, a lot of nice nuances. And then there was a different set, there are two different sets for realis. Those are things that you can know from experience. You see them right now, or you know they happened, or something like that. And within that, there's a distinction between simultaneous ones and sequential ones. And this is actually something you see cross-linguistically fairly often. What's kind of nice is that the same markers are suffixes, and the different markers are enclitics. So the same ones are a little more tightly connected to the verb, so that's kind of nice. Okay, that's the speaker you just heard. So you look around, what about this one? So she was telling her friend what her mother had said, looking into the future. She says, in the future, when you are older, when I am no longer here, okay, that makes sense. So that's da, that's different. That's da, different. You will remember. Okay, well, is that supposed to be same or different? Like, that's different from this, and this is different from that, but shouldn't they both be, well, whatever, okay.
She ulma yemakda a choda ma yakan ka okay.
Yeah. Okay, but then you look a little bit further and things start to break down. There are a lot of different markers that are showing up in constructions where the subjects are the same. So in the same thing, she says, that's why now, while I'm still alive, I do this for you. Okay, now I'm still alive, different, I do this for you. Whoops, you know.
Men in abal shto maka a kashoida a mulm kayhen.
This is a neat language. I mean, among all the neat things it's got a distinction between dentals and alveolars, so you can listen for that. And it's got ejectives and aspirated ones and plain ones and voiced ones. Anyway, this is a kind of water dog, kind of lizard that figures in a lot that's around there, and there's a lot of talk about lizards. Okay, here we have the opposite thing. We've got a same marker, but we've got different subjects. So she was talking to her friend about, they were talking about cures, and she says, to cure a woman who was ill, they tied live water dogs to a hoop, and then she was shoved through, okay? So actually, these are different subjects, okay? Here's what it looks like. So we've got the same marker here, but it's different subjects. It's they and it's she. Okay, let me get over there.
Sha awolo kashoyai dak o tolstet ba mota dak o mili mota ko beyo.
Yeah. Okay, same marker, different subjects. So you might say, if you're new at this, you might say, well, they make mistakes now and then. When you're not new at it, you know they never make mistakes. They really never make mistakes. Okay, so a little bit later, or very soon after that, she sort of said this. Strong people picked her up, and then this big, heavy woman was shoved through. So she did it again, and you've got these different subjects, and you've got the same marker. So it wasn't a mistake, but I knew that.
Mil duluwel ko beyo. Chat ya ta ya pitchma ba ma ta ba te iet.
Okay, and here, I'll give you another one. Oh, she was talking about this guy, and she says, when he was living with us in the wintertime, he got sick. Okay, so it's he and he, but we've got a different marker. Yeah, it's a loan word, isn't that neat? But it's got an inchoative and all this kind of stuff in it. Okay, the longer you look, the more you see that subject reference isn't going to do it. Okay, and if you look a little bit further, you say what these things are really doing is not just referring to subjects, they're packaging events. So they're packaging the same markers, put together things that are being packaged as elements of a single event. And the different ones are telling you these things are related, but they're separate events. So it's packaging single events versus distinct events. And it's not so surprising that that would go on to verbs and clauses. I mean, it's event stuff. Yeah, it's not subject reference. And the longer you look at spontaneous speech, the clearer it becomes it's really not subjects. Tommy Gavon talks about this. Other people talk about this too. He talks about strands of coherence. And he says there are different things that sort of decide, you know, what's coherent, what would give you same and event stuff, reference, spatiality, temporality, action routines. So, you know, if you've got same reference, that's more likely to be same, but it doesn't have to be. And the same, you know, if you're moving from place to place, that's more likely to be different. If it's the same place, it's more likely to be the same. So all of these things enter in Central Pomo and in Pomoan in general. Okay, it's an old Pomoan system. We can reconstruct it to Proto-Pomoan, which is several thousand years old. Okay, and we can still see the origin of a couple of the markers. Da, the different realis simultaneous marker, is actually a locative, just like Peter Austin found in Australia. Sorry, this is the best one I had. But you can see it's a locative, okay. And we can see what happened. So here she says, we saw this, in the wintertime, while he was living with us, he got sick while we were living at the ranch house. Okay, actually, I'll let you hear it.
Ranch house da Yamina Polda.
And look, there it is as a locative. Okay, so it makes sense. You've got something, you know, you're locating it in space, and then of course you locate it in time, and then you apply this to a whole clause. So it's not really a surprising development. And the other one, same kind of deal, this lead, different sequential, it comes also from a, I don't know how much time I've got to be careful about playing you too much. I won't play you too much here. Yeah, she says, and there's the other one. Okay, so those two work, but the rest of them, we can't see the source of them, but they look very much like Peter Austin's findings for Australia. They're locative sources. Okay, later on, there was another development, and this is something that happens fairly often. You've got this thing, and it got extended to a higher level of structure. In the form of initial sentence linkers that you put at the beginning of the sentence to tell you how this thought sort of relates to the previous stuff you'd been saying. So basically you take a marker like thus, and then there's a little verb be or do, which is just e, and you put one of these things on it. So you get something like thus being, or thus doing, or thus having done, something like that. And you can see what it looks like. So she said, when gathering buckeyes, you have to cook them as soon as you get them. If you let the buckeyes lay too long, they turn bad. That's why you have to rush the process. So here's the thus, being, same simultaneous. And this is relating it to the previous context, they turn bad. So it's jumped up. It's telling you how this whole thought relates to the previous. Okay, we turned it over, and then we turned it back over again. Okay, so here you have that. Okay, and then, yeah, so it's a higher level thing. When your muscles or bones ache, apply fresh pepperwood leaves. That fresh wormweed, you chew it up to a pulp and swallow it. When your belly starts hurting, then your insides will get well. Yeah, okay. Then willow, also sometimes its leaves are long on the tips. Okay. And so, and then, you can see the relation there. So it's relating to the previous stuff. Here's another one, different simultaneous. This is a way to catch fish. You put a weed on top of well, what did she say? Oh, yeah, you see where they are, and you put this kind of weed on it, it puts them to sleep, and then you just pick them up and take them home. Oh, yeah. So there's the fish would fall asleep, and that during that time you catch them. Okay, here's another one. You boil the buckeyes in something with water. They're boiled in hot water. The skin cracks up. That having happened, okay. So you can see, take them out of the hot water. So you can see how this works. Okay. These are all later developments. This happened in all of the Pomoan languages, but we can see that it happened after they had separated, so they're secondary developments. Because actually the bases on which they do it are not cognate. So Northern Pomo, they just do it onto a verb be. Southern Pomo, they have this verb to do thus. Kashaya, it's a different verb to be. And Central Pomo, there are two dialects, and in one dialect it's that verb, and in another dialect it's that verb. Okay. So the question is, did the locative-based construction spread by exaptation on the Australian model that Peter Austin found? Well, actually, we can get a little peek at this if we look at the neighbors. And they give us snapshots of this very early stage. This is something that takes place over a long period of time, so we don't, and especially since we don't have any depth, any great philological records. For Central Pomo, it's essentially, the depth is the time I spent in the field, so we don't have, Anyway, okay, Northern California, some of you know this, especially Northern California, lots and lots of very small language communities, which meant there was a lot of marriage outside of the communities, which meant that most people were multilingual. And early multilingual, so they were like native multilingual, at least native bilinguals. They had a mother who spoke one language, a father who spoke another language, and they were competent because they weren't learning it late in life. This happened very early. So, of course, there's a lot of exogamy, typically early multilingualism, but there was also something kind of interesting, and this is a little bit like what Patty was talking about at the beginning of the week. Politeness meant that you would speak the language of the community you were in. So no language mixing. When I go to visit you, I speak your language, and you come to visit me, you speak my language, okay? And if you think about what that means if you're, say, bilingual, and I'm deciding I'm speaking this language here, you control the parts of language that you're conscious of, which means you control vocabulary. So if I'm visiting you, I'm using your vocabulary, okay? However, there's probably other stuff that you're not really conscious of. For example, frequency of specifying certain distinctions. So if in my language I specify location a whole lot, okay, I go into your community and I'm speaking your language very carefully, but I'm probably going to specify location a lot more, which is true. And I'm going to use your resources, but I'm going to do it more. So what gets transferred actually is frequency of specification. And nobody says, oh my goodness, you mentioned direction 60% of the time, and here we only do it 10%. No, okay. Doesn't happen. Okay, well, the result is you have almost no lexical borrowing, very little lexical borrowing, but extensive grammatical parallels. Okay, so we're looking at the first neighbor. This is Wapo. So there's Pomoan. There's San Francisco right down here at the bottom. And there's Wapo. Okay. It's a southeastern neighbor. It's not related to Pomoan at all. Nobody's ever suggested it was. But there's a very long history of intermarriage and early multilingualism. This is what Wapo territory looks like. So fortunately for us, Paul Radin went to Wapo land in 1918, sent out by Kroeber, and he did really good field work. I mean, phonetics wasn't his strong point, but he recorded lots and lots of texts, very fortunately. And I'll just give you one. This is from a man called Jim Trippo that was recorded in 1918. And so you don't have to take in everything, but you can just kind of see what it looks like. So he starts out, they all lived at Loknomaki Old Coyote with his grandchild, Chief Chicken Hawk, and Hetsupi, okay. And Blue Jay was there, Blue Jay and Fish Crane, they were all there. Kind of notice he starts out the sentence with and, okay. Bear and Ground Owl, they were there, okay. Then they went on a deer hunt. And indeed, went deer hunting, okay. Say, Ground Owl, let's all get started. Then they set a snare. And then when they had finished setting the snares, they shouted, say, boys, you drive the deer in. Then they drove the deer around. And this is the straight text. I'm not taking anything out here. Then Blue Jay and Pelican drove them around. Then the deer came out of the bush. They came out. Then it said Bear chased Blue Jay. And then Blue Jay yelled. Okay, you get the idea. There's a lot of pata in there. Okay, like all the time. Okay. And it doesn't matter whether the subjects are the same or different. So here's one with the same subject. Then they set the snare, and when they had finished setting the snares, they shouted. Okay, and they drove. So those are the same subjects, but here you have different subjects. Then blue jay and pelican drove them around, and then the deer came out of the bush. So it's not about subjects. Then beer, okay. And blue jay yelled. Okay, well, when do you not get pata? Okay, only when you're conjoining things that aren't sequential events. So one place is when you're first setting the scene. Okay, nothing happened before that. You're just kind of setting things up. Another is kind of offline description, where you're not talking about another event that happened. Direct quotations, of course, unless it's within the direct quotation. So here's an initial scene setting. They all lived at, okay. So there's no pata there. Of course, it's the beginning of the narrative. Here's description. Then they piled them all up in one place. It looked wonderful. They were piled up. Okay, there's no pata there because there's no new event. Okay. You don't put it with direct quotations, of course. Then bear went after blue jay. Ouch, yelled blue jay. Okay. You wouldn't say and then ouch. Okay. Where are you, pelican? Your Uncle Bear has grabbed me, so there. Okay. Because they're not sequential events. What about frequency? All of the consecutive events are marked, so it's highly frequent in narrative. And it doesn't just link sentences, it also links clauses. Then he took out some of his beads and turned his bag inside out. Put his bear blanket, okay, and his white bear blanket on, took down his bow, and went out in the sweat house. So it's linking both sentences and clauses. Okay, so what's happened here is very clearly what's been replicated isn't the fine little switch reference. It's not switch reference, switch event morphology. It's just a propensity to say and then, and then, and then. So it's just the frequency that's been replicated. And it's been extended to all sequential clauses. And of course, this is exactly what sets the stage for grammaticalization. Okay, Radin describes his narrator. He says, Jim Trippo was an individual of about 60 or 65 years, so that means he was born in the 1850s. He'd spent most of his life among his people, with the exception of a 10-year sojourn among the lower Lake Pomo. Okay, this is really common. And the last WAPO speakers that I knew actually had one Pomoan parent and one WAPO parent. Okay, now we're going to an entirely different family. Okay, there's Pomoan. This is Lake Miwok. Okay. It's around Clear Lake, nice beautiful lake there. Lucy Freeland fortunately went out, and this was published much later, collected a lot of Miwok, and she collected Western Miwok texts with a linguistic sketch. So this was recorded in 1922 from a speaker named Maggie Johnson, who happened to be married to a Pomo man. Okay, as were many other people. So the text goes, two brothers left home, distraught over the death of their sister. One went east, the other west. One went west, died, but the other one that traveled on. Okay, and then he came to the place where the bear people came out from the lake. And the man sat there at the end of the lake and waited for them. He saw the tracks that looked like those people and big ones, and the man waited, they say, for 1 night and 2 days. Then some bear people came out, and the big ones came out first, and then the little ones came out. Then, you're seeing a trend here. Ekal, ekal, ekal. Okay. Ekal, ekal, ekal. Yeah. Yeah, you know. Happily ever after. But, yeah. Okay, so this ekal, and then it links both sentences and clauses. So here you have, then she married him and they live happily ever after. So that's linking this sentence to the earlier sentences, and here it's really a clause. There's a lot of it. Okay, so I looked through all the texts that Lucy Freeland, that exist. There were a total of 231 clauses, and over half of them begin with ekal, so 52%. And each marked clause is a new event in the sequence. The subjects might be the same, and then he went upward, and he came to the world above, or different. He made a fire and he danced 10 days, 10 nights he danced. And then his elder brother came back to life. So they haven't figured out same or difference. So what do you not mark with? Ekal. It's very, very clear. One is if you're packaging things as part of a single event, you use a different marker. This is miti. Okay? There, the man sat down at the end of the lake and waited. So he sat down and waited. And so you've got this miti. That's another aerial feature, by the way, the dental versus alveolar. So miti links tightly related events. Okay? Often the first is a preparation for the second. So you had it with, he sat there and waited, he went up to it and recognized his brother, he opened the door and took out the reeds, his mother took him in her arms and they cried, he came out and called his people together, often they were sort of positioning for it, he went out and shot a rock, he stepped into the fire and was burned. Okay. When do you have no marker at all? Well, no surprise, it's just like WAPO. If you have things that are not events in sequence, so the beginning of a story, you set the scene, they were all living in Yountsville. Okay, a young girl died. Offline description, then he gathered together the people from all around. 4 days I shall dance, he told them, and then he danced. They say, my grandmother went there. Okay, so that's offline. My grandmother was a little girl. So it's not sequential, and so there's no that. There's something else that's actually aerial, very interesting. There's beautiful couplet structure in these languages, and that is people will say something once, and then if it's important, they say it a second time with some kind of little variation. So maybe they'll put in a synonym, or maybe if you have an active, the next one will be a passive, or maybe they'll change the word order a little bit, or they'll add a little something, and it's a nice aerial feature. And so here we have, and then the man spoke to Bear Girl, and she caught hold of him. Bear Girl caught hold of him. That's a kind of couplet structure there. And there's no and then, because of course the speaker was repeating the same thing. So where does this linker ekal come from? Well, we can tell. Actually, it comes from now. Okay, so it's raining now, ekal. Okay, or what should he do now? Okay. So it's the native word for now. So they used a native word for this, as did the WAPO. And they just exploited it to specify this copied frequency of specification. This is from Catherine Callahan, who worked with this language. So we have a starting point, frequency. Okay, so you've got this frequent stuff, but how could you have something that's frequent like that and have it jump to be a same and different marker, like a enclitic or suffix? Well, I think this is kind of interesting. Something else that we know travels very easily in contact is prosody, more easily than a lot of other things. And what's interesting, what I find interesting, is that if you listen to Central Pomo speakers speaking English, they often group conjunctions with the preceding conjunct. So these ladies were talking about, they were talking about this no good husband of a neighbor. And actually, hayu is the word for dog. Okay, so she says, yeah, kept coming back, and that's when you call him hayu. Okay, and the other friend says blah 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 blah, and she says, yeah, that's what a real dog do. You can say get out of here and kick it, and then comes back to you and come up to you, and will be petted. Okay, this is what she said. You can hear how she says it, but pay attention to where she puts prosodically her conjunctions.
So kept coming back, and that's when you call them hayu. So that's what.
Well, in English too, you take out your dog.
That's what a real dog do. You can say, get out of here, kick it, and everything. That comes back to you and come up, you will be petted.
So you can see how you get this transfer of constituency, in a sense. There are the two ladies who were talking about the hayu. I was very lucky. I had speakers who loved to gossip, and you just get the best data. And you can just see the beginnings of this attachment here in Lake Miwok. So he saw tracks that, so this is from Lucy Freeland, he saw tracks that looked like those of people and And this is how she transcribed it. Big ones were there and many little tracks. So you can see, and this is the same one, the tightly attached ones. So we can just see that. Okay, well, it turns out that Lake Miwok has relatives outside of this linguistic area, so there are other Miwok languages. So there's Lake Miwok, and here's Sierra Miwok, 3 different languages, dialects. And fortunately, the same person, Lucy Freeland, worked with them too. So we know that differences aren't attributable to Lucy Freeland, to the person documenting them. So, and she writes, the Miwok of the Sierras, on the other hand, had no contact with the groups to the west, that's like Lake Miwok, and apparently did not know of their existence. They'd been separated from them for a long period, and their speech is so different that it is best to regard the Miwok of the Coast Range and the Miwok of the Sierras as 2 distinct, though obviously related languages. Okay. And what's interesting about these other Miwok languages is you don't see those kinds of pervasive clause linkers. And it's the same person. So she recorded this long text. I won't give you the whole thing. But he went to get wood in the morning, went to get pitch that day. See here, well, anyway, when he got back to the house, he fell asleep. This would be full of and thens in Lake Miwok. There's one. He made a fire in the house to make tea, you see, and before he was ready to eat, he fell asleep. So they have the material, they just don't use it. So while he was waiting for his tea, he lay down, and no and, dropped off to sleep for a moment, no and. In his sleep, he kicked the pine needles into the fire. The pine needles caught fire, but no mention of that. They filled the house with smoke. Then the whole house caught fire, no and, smothered him. Sorry about that. So big difference in how they're packaging things. There's nothing like the Coast Miwok pervasive initial sequential linker ekal, nor the same linker miti. Okay, you just have this yo thing then, so they've got the equipment, but they're not really using it to the same extent. And the other Sierra, the other related Miwok languages are like that. They don't have anything like that. So it kind of looks like Lake Miwok was very much affected by the highly grammaticalized Pomoan clause combining enhanced frequency. Okay. And they've got this distinction of tightly related events and loosely related events, the same and the different stuff. Okay, and frequency is the first step in the development of grammar. Okay, well, let's look at just one more. Oh, I better hurry up and look at it quickly. Okay. There's Pomoan, there's Yuki, okay? Yuki is the northern neighbor. It's unrelated to Pomoan, and it's unrelated to Miwok. There's possibly a remote relation to Wapo, okay, or not. And most sentences begin with a linker, okay? They're quite different, totally different in form from anything else. They have a same or different marker, and then they might have another little piece. Ooh. Okay, we'll go real fast here. I have my cord here. But you can see how this kind of stuff goes. Okay, so there's more distinctions here. I'll go through this very quickly because I think you have the idea. Here's the origin story. Da-da, da-da, da-da. I think you kind of get the idea. Okay, so every sentence essentially begins with an and then, different or an and them. Maybe I should I plug it in? I'll plug it in. Let's see if there's a, yes. I think I can do it here. Yeah. Whoa. Hope it still remembers where it was. What should I do? Yes. We're good. Thanks. Okay. I won't slow down now. Okay. Anyway, you get the idea. So we've got then, different, was about to come in, da-da-da, then, okay, da-dum, da-dum. So basic, and these are all kind of sequential. So you can see there's lots of them. Kind of get the general idea, yes. So, yeah, there's lots. This is very interesting because Kroeber at Berkeley documented this right at the very beginning of the 20th century. He was lucky enough to find really the last speaker of Yuki, Ralph Moore, a young guy, but who'd been raised by his grandparents. So he was a very good speaker, even though he was the last speaker. And then very recently, Uldis Balotis from Santa Barbara did a beautiful grammar based on all the Kroeber materials, which were found in a surprising place, but that's another story. Okay, so basically in Yuki, you've got the frequency replication. Now you have these obligatory sentence initial markers. The substance doesn't match Pomoan, it doesn't match Mwapo, and certainly not Miwok. Kroeber assumed they were same versus different subjects, but no, it's the same thing. You find different markers when you have the same subjects, and you find same markers when you have different subjects, although more often it matches, but definitely not. I'll just kind of tell you that. Okay, so what does this all mean? Okay, well, no surprise, grammaticalization of such clause combining may not be entirely language internal. Okay, we keep finding similar constructions in neighboring but unrelated languages, suggesting influences from contact. But the whole point is such systems aren't necessarily borrowed like that. Okay, maybe they're borrowed, maybe it's their precursors that are borrowed. And I think that's very clear that we have a nice snapshot of this. And the precursors can then set the stage for further internally motivated developments. It could be that ongoing bilingualism sort of hastens these internal developments. We can't really know. So in Northern California, you've got this intensive, long-standing contact, intermarriage, early multilingualism, frequential copying. You specify certain distinctions, and you have these patterns of expression. And bound morphology can be less accessible to consciousness. What's interesting, these guys didn't borrow the little suffixes and enclitics or replicate them. What they borrowed were those kind of big, fat initial sentence markers. No surprise, I got one of those, I can make one of those. So it wasn't the affixes and the clitics that were borrowed, okay? And we see these replica constructions in the neighboring languages at slightly different stages. So in Mwapo, you just have this and then. In Lake Miwok, you have and then, but you've got one for closely related things and another one for different ones. In Yuki, you've got the same and different, but they've developed further distinctions by adding stuff on. So you end up with and then, while, thus, therefore, and so you've got, these things that are already grammaticalizing, but in a slightly different way. And they all use native substance. So the mechanisms underlying the areality make better sense once we understand the precise nature of the system. Because if we were thinking this is just same subject and different subject, it wouldn't make sense. I mean, the trajectory, the pathway of transfer would be much harder to understand. But once we realize you're combining events, then it makes perfect sense that you're specifying the relation between the events, and that's what you're copying. And the point is, the systems are understood as constantly evolving. And that's it. Okay. So there's time for questions. Anybody have any?
Yeah, thank you very much. This was just a fascinating talk. I have one question. If I understood you correctly, you're arguing that these clause initial elements would become suffixes by prosodically leaning to the left. Was
yes.
It as like diatropic clitics type of elements? Mm-hmm. And I think as such, this that function words that are that stand at the left edge of their syntactic domain lean to the left prosodically is quite well known and so on. But typically, I'm only aware of this phenomenon within clauses. So you would have maybe an article or an preposition or so leaning to the left to whatever noun phrase, for example, is to the left, and not so much across clause boundaries. And there, the prosodic boundary is probably a much bigger prosodic boundary. And I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about how this could work in a prosodic way.
Yeah. Are you sort of wondering whether the same different things are different prosodically? Are you wondering?
I just think like clause internally, the prosodic boundaries aren't as hard, the pauses aren't as long, so like it's more plausible how this could work, but across clauses you kind of expect this is a big gap, and how does this work historically that we can actually bridge this gap?
I think that's a really nice point, and that's certainly true. Something you couldn't tell by just hearing a little bit of this. This language, it's like French in one way, and that is when you first hear it, you don't know where the boundaries are between words. You feel really stupid because it's resyllabified. So in Central Pomo, there are a lot of initial clusters that has to do with interesting sound changes. So you end up with, initial H, glottalized T, stuff like that. And what happens in speech is that they resyllabify, so you have a different syllabic structure. So it's really, really tight in that sense. You're quite right. I think that's a really, really nice point. And of course, these locatives were actually their enclitics on the noun. So I think that's a really nice point. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, and I did look to see whether the clauses linked by same markers are closer prosodically than the ones linked by different markers, and in general they are. Which makes perfect sense, yeah. Of course, speakers, because this is kind of a how am I going to package everything I have to say, speakers wouldn't necessarily always make the same decisions across speakers about what to package together, but that's the way it should be, yeah. Thank you, that's a nice point, yeah. Well, that's easy. Jorge has one.
If no one else has a question, I have one that is more like maybe methodological. So a lot of the texts that were published for North American languages, my understanding is that they're heavily edited.
Oh, good point.
So I want to know how that plays a role into what we see as like neat sequences without any extra stuff.
I think that's a good point. Very nicely, my impression is these were not. These guys really knew. I mean, it was pre-phoneme, so but yeah. I mean, they just threw stuff in there without trying to think how it fit with their descriptive models, which is very, very nice. So it's not like they thought they understood how it worked and made it match like that. So you have all kinds of stuff that they wouldn't understand in a sense, which is just wonderful for us because now we can go back and say, gee, I wonder about that. So these particular ones weren't. My sense is that in general it's pretty good. Of course, they didn't have recorders, so they were madly trying to write things down, and that always has to make some difference. So you don't have conversation. Nobody could keep up with, I think that's a good point. But just on the basis of these guys, it's really impressive how much stuff they have in there that they couldn't have made sense out of at that point 100 years ago.
I'm thinking about maybe what was the stuff from Boas and whether earlier versions of it are different from the published versions of it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting point. But a lot of the stuff was being written by native speakers for him. So that's kind of neat. And of course, they weren't trying to make grammatical sense out of it at all, and they had it in their heads. So, and I have the sense that Boas didn't, I don't know, I haven't, have you looked at the before and after?
I'm trying to think of one story in particular that I think had changes.
Yeah. I mean, we all go back and fix the spelling and stuff, but yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful talk. I was wondering, is it possible that there were languages that actually had subject switch reference rather than the event like? Because I'm thinking, for instance, of English absolutes with the economy slowing down, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So here, they tend to have different subjects, and it's not really about events. So yeah, and is there then the option that they had this first, but then evolved into the other direction?
I think that's definitely a possibility. My sense is that that's not what's going on here, but I think it's absolutely a logical possibility. And I think there certainly are systems in the world where it really is subject co-reference. And what we need to find out now is, can you go from one to the other in both directions or not? I don't know if we have enough time to to know this, but it makes perfect sense. So presumably, I mean, you'd like to think that the two systems might arise from slightly different source structures, but then they could be reinterpreted, because most of the time, same event is co-referential subjects. So it'd be easy to reinterpret it. I think that's a really nice point, yeah. Yeah, thank you. John McWhorter had something?
Marianne, Saramaccan Creole has sequential marking like this. It's taken certain material and pragmaticized it to a degree that its very close sister Creoles haven't. And I've just kind of been playing with it for years. Is there any room in your analysis for thinking of it as a highly conventionalized kind of new information marking, which is what I lay awake calling it, but I had never listened to somebody talk about it in other languages.
Yeah. For this system, I think it's not at all new information. They do information in completely different ways. So I don't see it here, but that would be another interesting wrinkle if, I mean, so an interesting thing that comes up when you talk about these kinds of systems is, I mean, it's a pervasive issue, are the marked things subordinate or just dependent because of their marking? And for these languages, it's very clear it's not subordinate. I mean, you say, wash your hair, go wash your face and comb your hair, and you get this marker here, but it's not like having washed your face, I mean, they're really, or come on in and sit down. So for these languages, no, but it would be interesting if it did happen, yeah. Yeah. Did you have something?
Just wondering where I can pick up a copy of your talk or
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. If you can think to send me an email message, I could send you, yeah, I could send you, yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think it's time to quit. Whoops. Yeah. Okay, I'll just leave it like that.
So as we mentioned earlier, to close our conference, we'll have a closing song from Robert Soto, Lipan Apache, official.
That was a very interesting lecture, by the way. Where's she at? I'm even just afraid to say anything about language because you might write it in a book or something. No. My name is Robert Soto. I'm the vice chairman of the Lipan Apache Tribe of Texas. And languages are an interesting subject for us because up to 1995, just about 22 years ago, it was illegal to speak our language in the state of Texas. And not so much that we couldn't speak the language in the state of Texas, but there was a law written in the Constitution of the Republic of Texas that carried on as statehood, that if you were a Lipan Apache, you were ordered to be shot on sight, scalped and sold your scalp to the Mexican government for 100 pesos if you were a man, 75 pesos if you were a woman, and 50 pesos if you were a child. So to preserve who we were, the only way we could survive was to stop practicing a lot of our cultural traditions and stop speaking our language. So our language is pretty much almost dead. I do want to just thank God, our Creator, for linguistics that came all the way from Switzerland and other places. That before there was that they preserved the language as best as they could. And so now the debate is, shall we pursue finding our historical language of the Lipan Apaches, which there is some documentation, or should we just go with our cousins, the Jicarilla Apaches in northern New Mexico, who have preserved the language and they didn't have to worry about being shot and scalped. And but that was just a very interesting lecture. I just want to thank you. I'm glad that you were not one of my professors in either my bachelor's and my master's, because I would have lost you. I couldn't write that fast. This has nothing to do with the ceremony, because I just wanted to carry on the fan here. But you can't see it very well, but there's a little button here that somebody gave me. Hot pink and lime green are my favorite colors. And it simply says, "We won." That's what it says, "We won." And the reason I carried this is this is my Golden Eagle fan given to me by a Desert Storm veteran for offering prayers to him every day while he was up in harm's way. And the reason I use this is because, bring it up here, is just because I can. In 2006, March 11th, the United States government sent undercover agents into our family gathering that we've been having since the 40s, and threatened me with 15 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine for the illegal possession of eagle feathers. You think our government has better use to do with their time and money. But after that I had to surrender all my feathers, I felt that my religious rights and civic rights as a Native individual of the Americas had been violated, and I took the government to court. And June 13th of 2016, we signed into law the very first victory against the federal government, giving us the right to use these feathers. And so I just carry them because I can. It's a real honor to be invited to be here. I didn't know if I should verbalize a prayer. So at the end, I just felt like I could sing a prayer. Songs are real important to us. Language describes who we are and where we came from and the essence of who we were as a Native community. And that's why it was so important for the government to take away our languages, which is interesting that people are there to preserve our language, which is good. And so I'm going to sing this song. The words of the song is Gush Teo Sin Chayahe. And basically the prayer says, God Creator, be with us in the journey. And that journey could be anything. That journey could be going home today. The journey of illness, the journey of victory, the journeys of defeat. The essence of His presence and everything we do and everything we are comes out in this song. And so I just thought I sing this song for you. It is appropriate in the Native community that when a prayer song is sung, that people stand up if you can. And so I'm going to just ask you if you could please stand as the song is being sung.
We have a gift. We have a gift that we've brought from around the world. Mr. Soto. Well, we just wanted to present him with these things that our participants brought from around the world to you. So just to say thanks. Yes. Thanks. Oh, yeah. For those of you who are not coming to our excursions tomorrow or to the mariachi mass, safe travels, and we'll see you in Canberra. Bye-bye.
And let's thank Bridget again for one of the best ever ICHLs. Thank you, Bridget.